The red light cast an eerie glow across the dark war room as the hologram materialized above the central table. Guildmaster Korax leaned forward, his alien features twisted in concentration as he read through the contract details. His 4 eyes moved rapidly across the floating text, absorbing every word of what appeared to be a routine assassination job. The target seemed ordinary enough. Ambassador James Michal, a human diplomat stationed in the Outer Rim territories, according to the client's information. This Mitchell had been causing significant problems for certain business operations in the sector, the kind of problems that required permanent solutions. What made Korax's mandibles click with satisfaction was the payment amount glowing at the bottom of the contract. 50 million Galactic credits. In his 3 decades leading the Assassin's Guild, Korax had rarely seen such generous compensation for what appeared to be a simple elimination. Humans were considered soft targets throughout the galaxy, known more for their diplomatic chatter than any real fighting ability. This should have been easy money for any competent killer. Korax input his authorization codes and uploaded the contract to the Guild's secure network. Within seconds, the job posting would reach every registered assassin from the core worlds to the frontier systems. He expected the contract to be claimed within the hour, probably by one of the mid-tier operatives looking to make their reputation on an easy job, but as Korax watched his terminal, something strange began to happen. Instead of acceptance notifications, rejection messages started flooding his screen. The first few didn't concern him. Some assassins were picky about their targets or had scheduling conflicts, but as the rejections continued to pour in, his confidence began to waver. Viper-7, known for taking any job that paid well, declined without explanation. The Shadow Twins, who specialized in diplomatic targets, refused the contract. Even Razor, a desperate newcomer who had accepted every available job for the past 6 months, sent back a rejection notice. What truly alarmed Korax was when Nightfall declined the contract. Nightfall was a legend in the assassination world, a phantom who had never been seen but whose work spoke for itself. This mysterious killer had eliminated some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Warlord Brutus of the Iron Fleet, whose personal shields could deflect starship weapons, had been found dead in his supposedly impenetrable fortress. The Phantom Queen, who could phase through solid matter at will, had simply vanished one day, leaving only a signature energy burn that marked Nightfall's handiwork. If Nightfall wouldn't take a contract on a simple human diplomat, something was very wrong. By the void, Korax muttered in his guttural native language, his claws clicking nervously against the control panel. These killers have eliminated the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, yet they refuse one human. His lieutenant, Drac, approached the table with obvious concern. The scarred veteran had served under 3 different guild masters and had never seen anything like this. His weathered face bore the marks of countless battles, and his remaining good eye held a wisdom that came from surviving in the deadliest profession in the galaxy. Master Drac said carefully, "Perhaps we should investigate why everyone is refusing this particular contract. There might be information we don't have." Korax waved him off dismissively. "Post a bonus," he commanded. "Double the payment to 100 million credits. Greed will overcome whatever superstition is causing this nonsense." The updated contract went live across the network, now offering a sum that could buy a small fleet of warships. Korax was certain that such an enormous payday would attract someone willing to take the risk, but minutes passed, then hours, and still the contract remained unclaimed. Even the most desperate assassins, those who typically fought each other for scraps of work, ignored the posting entirely. The silence was deafening. For the first time in the Guild's 1,000-year history, a target had been universally rejected by every single assassin in their database. The journey to Station Omega-7 took Korax 3 days through hyperspace, giving him plenty of time to think about the mysterious rejection of his human contract. The station itself existed in the gray area between legal and illegal space, a perfect refuge for those who lived in the shadows. As his ship docked, Korax could smell the familiar mixture of engine fuel, stale air, and danger that permeated these kinds of places. The Broken Blade Cantina sat tucked away in the station's lower levels, far from the prying eyes of station security. This wasn't the kind of establishment that appeared on tourist maps. The entrance was unmarked, hidden behind a false wall that only opened when the right code was entered. Inside, dim lighting cast long shadows across worn metal tables where some of the galaxy's most dangerous retired killers came to forget their past. Korax pushed through the heavy door and immediately felt dozens of eyes turn toward him. Conversations died mid-sentence as the guildmaster stepped into the smoky interior. These weren't active assassins who still answered to him. These were the survivors, the ones who had lived long enough to retire, with their limbs and sanity mostly intact. The bartender, a cybernetically enhanced being with more metal than flesh, nodded respectfully as Korax approached the bar. Without being asked, he poured a glass of Korax's preferred drink, a blue liquid that glowed faintly in the dim light. "Looking for someone specific, Guildmaster?" the bartender asked in a voice that sounded like grinding gears. "Information," Korax replied, taking a sip of his drink. "About humans." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every conversation in the cantina stopped completely. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Cards froze in players' hands. The silence was so complete that Korax could hear the station's life support systems humming in the walls. From a corner booth, an old reptilian assassin slowly stood up. Korax recognized him immediately as Vash, once known as the Silent Death. The veteran killer was missing his left arm, right leg, and most of his tail, souvenirs from decades of the most dangerous work in the galaxy. He moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned that every movement could be his last. "Guildmaster," Vash said, his voice carrying the respect due to Korax's position, but also something else. Something that sounded almost like pity. "Please tell me you're not seriously considering putting out a contract on humans." Korax felt his patience wearing thin. Why does everyone react like this? They're just humans. Soft, weak, diplomatic. Creatures who solve problems with words instead of weapons. Vash limped closer, his remaining good eye fixed on Korax with disturbing intensity. Other patrons began gathering around, forming a loose circle. These weren't curious onlookers. These were veterans, sharing hard-learned wisdom with someone who clearly didn't understand the danger he was contemplating. "Let me show you something," Vash said, pulling a small holoprojector from his jacket. The device was old and battered, but it still functioned. This recording was made 6 months ago. The hologram flickered to life, showing a corridor aboard what appeared to be a trading station. The image quality was excellent, clearly taken from military-grade surveillance equipment. A figure moved through the scene, completely invisible to normal sight, but outlined in the recording's enhanced spectrum display. "That's Raperthry," Vash explained, one of the best stealth specialists in the business. His cloaking technology was top-tier, military-grade, stolen from the Galactic Defense Force, completely undetectable by any known sensor system. The invisible figure approached what seemed to be an empty hallway. Then, without warning, a human appeared in the frame. He was unremarkable in appearance, middle-aged with graying hair, and wearing simple trader's clothing. The nameplate on the recording identified him as William Thompson, a merchant dealing in rare minerals. What happened next defied everything Korax thought he knew about humans. Thompson suddenly stopped walking and turned directly toward the invisible assassin, not searching, not guessing, but turning with the precision of someone who knew exactly where his stalker was hiding. "I know you're there," Thompson said in a calm, almost conversational tone. His voice carried no fear, no surprise, just the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of an obvious situation. "Would you prefer to do this the easy way, or the hard way?" The Recording showed Repertory's outline wavering slightly, betraying the assassin's shock. For several seconds, the two figures faced each other, the invisible killer and the apparently defenseless human. Then the feed cut to static. Vosh deactivated the projector, and the cantina remained silent. The old assassin leaned heavily on his remaining good leg, his scarred face grim with remembered fear. Repertory was never seen again, Vash whispered, his voice barely audible above the station's ambient noise. His ship was found drifting 3 systems away, completely empty. No signs of struggle, no indication of what happened to him. The guildmaster felt a chill run down his spine. But how could Thompson have detected him? The technology was perfect. Vash's laugh was bitter and humorless. That's what we all thought. But humans don't just detect us, Guildmaster. He paused, his remaining eye distant, with dark memories. They hunt the hunters. Krovik had always been different from the other assassins at the Guild Academy, where others showed respect for veteran killers and their hard-earned wisdom. He displayed only arrogance and contempt. At 27 years old, he believed himself superior to the old-timers who filled cantinas with their war stories and missing limbs. To Krovik, these veterans were relics of a bygone era, too slow and outdated to understand modern assassination techniques. When word of the universal rejection of the human contract reached him, Krovik laughed out loud. He couldn't believe that every single assassin in the guild had turned down such easy money. 50 million credits, later increased to 100 million, for killing one soft human diplomat. It seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime, and Krovik couldn't understand why everyone else was too scared or stupid to take it. The stories that circulated through the underground didn't impress him either. Tales of vanished assassins, and humans who could somehow detect invisible killers sounded like superstitious nonsense to his young ears. Krovik had grown up with the latest technology, trained with quantum phase equipment that made the older stealth systems look like children's toys. He was convinced that the previous failures had simply used inferior equipment or lacked proper training. His quantum phase suit was a masterpiece of modern engineering, stolen from a top-secret military research facility at great expense. Unlike traditional cloaking devices that merely bent light around the user, the quantum phase technology actually shifted the wearer slightly out of normal space-time to any sensor, camera, or living being. Someone wearing the suit simply didn't exist in the same reality. It was theoretically impossible to detect, and Krovik had tested it extensively against the most advanced security systems available. The journey to New Geneva station took him 2 weeks of careful planning. He studied the station's layout, memorized the embassy's floor plans, and analyzed Ambassador James Mitchell's daily routine down to the minute. The human appeared to be exactly what Krovik expected, a middle-aged bureaucrat who spent his days reading reports and attending boring diplomatic meetings. There were no visible security measures beyond standard embassy protocols, no bodyguards, and no indication that Mitchell was anything other than a typical soft target. Infiltrating the embassy proved almost insultingly easy. Krovik's quantum suit allowed him to walk through security checkpoints without triggering a single alarm. Guards looked right through him as he passed, their eyes focusing on empty space where he should have been standing. He moved through corridors filled with embassy staff, none of whom showed any awareness of his presence. The ambassador's office was located on the 3rd floor, a spacious room with large windows overlooking the station's central plaza. Mitchell sat behind an ornate wooden desk that seemed oddly out of place in the sterile environment of a space station. Diplomatic reports were scattered across the surface, and the human appeared completely absorbed in reading them. Krovik crept across the carpeted floor, his movements perfectly silent, thanks to years of training and the suit's noise-dampening capabilities. He withdrew his plasma blade, a weapon capable of cutting through starship hull plating with ease. The blade hummed softly as it powered up, its energy field glowing with deadly blue light. This was the moment Krovik had been waiting for. One quick strike, and he would claim the largest bounty in guild history. He raised the weapon above his head, positioning himself directly behind the unsuspecting human. "Third desk drawer, left side," Mitchell said casually, without looking up from his reports. "That's where I keep the good coffee. You look like you could use some." The words hit Krovic like a physical blow. His quantum phase field wavered, reality seeming to shimmer around him as his concentration shattered. The plasma blade remained frozen above his head as his mind struggled to process what had just happened. Mitchell slowly set down his datapad and turned in his chair, looking directly at where Krovic stood invisible. The human's expression was mild and pleasant, like a grandfather greeting a favorite grandchild. There was no fear in his eyes, no surprise, just calm acknowledgement of the situation. "Krovic Shelburne of Kepler Station," Mitchell said in the same conversational tone. "Age 27, graduated third in your class from the Assassin's Guild Academy. Your mother still sends you care packages, doesn't she? I believe the last one contained those chocolate cookies you loved as a child." The young assassin stumbled backward, his weapon clattering to the floor as his hands shook uncontrollably. The quantum phase suit flickered between states, his form becoming visible in patches as his concentration completely failed. "Impossible," Krovic gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "You cannot know these things. My technology is perfect. I don't exist in your reality." Mitchell chuckled softly and stood up from his chair, moving with the easy confidence of someone completely in control of the situation. "Son," he said gently, his tone almost paternal. "My species spent thousands of years tracking woolly mammoths across frozen wastelands, using nothing but footprints in the snow and animal instincts. We followed our prey for days, weeks even, never losing the trail." The human walked around his desk, approaching the still flickering assassin with calm, measured steps. "You think a little fancy technology is going to hide you from senses that were honed by evolution itself? We can smell your fear, hear the change in your breathing, feel the displacement of air when you move." Krovic's quantum phase suit finally gave up completely, leaving him fully visible and trembling in the middle of the embassy office, his weapon lying useless at his feet. Mitchell's gesture toward the chair was more of a gentle suggestion than a command, but Krovic found himself moving toward it anyway. His legs felt unsteady, like someone learning to walk for the first time. The confidence that had carried him through years of training and dozens of successful missions had evaporated completely, leaving behind a confused young man who suddenly realized how little he actually understood about the universe. The chair was surprisingly comfortable, made of real leather rather than the synthetic materials common on most space stations. Krovic sank into it heavily, his mind still reeling from the impossible situation he found himself in. The ambassador moved with casual ease to a small kitchen area tucked into one corner of the office, where a thermal dispenser waited with what appeared to be genuine Earth coffee. The smell that filled the room was rich and complex, nothing like the synthetic caffeine drinks that most spacers consumed. Mitchell poured 2 cups with practiced movements, adding cream to his own before offering some to his unexpected guest. The normalcy of the gesture felt surreal after everything that had just happened. "Real coffee," Mitchell explained, settling back into his chair with his steaming cup. "One of the few luxuries I insist on having, no matter where my diplomatic duties take me. There's something about the ritual of brewing and sharing coffee that helps people have honest conversations." Krovic accepted the cup with trembling hands, grateful for something to focus on besides the ambassador's knowing eyes. The coffee was better than anything he had ever tasted, warm and comforting in a way that seemed to calm his shattered nerves slightly. "Now," Mitchell began, his voice taking on the tone of a patient teacher, "let me explain what you don't understand about humans. Most species in this galaxy evolved to fill specific niches. Some became apex predators with sharp claws and powerful muzzles. Others developed incredible speed or deadly venom. But humans took a different path entirely. The ambassador leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. We evolved as persistence hunters, on a world where survival meant never giving up. Our ancestors didn't catch their prey by being faster or stronger than massive creatures, like woolly mammoths or saber-toothed cats. Instead, they developed something far more dangerous, the ability to track anything, anywhere, for as long as it took. Mitchell paused to take a sip of his coffee, letting his words sink in. Picture this, a small group of humans with nothing but primitive spears, following a herd of animals across hundreds of miles of frozen wasteland. They could track their target through blizzards, across rivers, over mountains. They could read signs that other predators couldn't even see. A bent blade of grass, a disturbed pebble, the faint scent of fear carried on the wind. Krovik found himself leaning forward, drawn in despite his fear. The ambassador's words painted a picture of humans that was completely different from everything he had been taught. That hunting instinct never left us, Mitchell continued. When we reached the stars and encountered other species, we didn't abandon those abilities. We refined them. We learned to read the subtle signs that other beings give off when they're lying, afraid, or planning violence. We can sense changes in body temperature, detect shifts in breathing patterns, even pick up on electromagnetic fluctuations from nervous systems. The ambassador reached across his desk and slid a datapad toward Krovik. The device was standard, diplomatic equipment, but what appeared on the screen made the young assassin's blood run cold. Every assassin who has attempted to kill a human in the past year is listed in this database, Mitchell explained calmly. Take a look at the status column. Notice something interesting. Krovik's eyes scanned the list, recognizing name after name of legendary killers. Repertory the Phantom, who had vanished during his attempt on the traitor. Shadowbane, who specialized in eliminating military targets. The Night Whisperer, whose very name was spoken only in whispers among the guild's most elite members. But instead of showing them as dead or missing, every entry had the same status. Recruited. They're all alive, Krovik whispered, his voice barely audible. Mitchell nodded, his expression almost paternal. Very much so, and they're all working for human intelligence services now. It turns out that when you show professional killers who the real monsters are in this galaxy, they become quite eager to redirect their considerable skills toward more deserving targets. The ambassador stood and walked to the large window overlooking the station's central plaza. Below, beings from dozens of species went about their daily business, unaware of the conversation taking place in the embassy above them. The slavers who traffic in sentient beings, Mitchell said, his voice taking on a harder edge. The war criminals who massacre civilians for profit. The crime lords who poison entire worlds with their drugs. These are the beings who truly deserve the attention of skilled assassins, don't you think? Krovik stared at the datapad, scrolling through detailed profiles of each recruited assassin. The information showed their new assignments, their success rates, and most shocking of all, their apparent satisfaction with their new careers. We don't kill assassins, son, Mitchell said, turning back from the window with a slight smile. We simply give them better targets to hunt. The Grand Conference Hall on Nexus Prime had witnessed many historic moments, but nothing quite like what was unfolding now. Guildmaster Korax stood at the head of a massive obsidian table, surrounded by the most powerful crime lords in the galaxy. These weren't petty thieves or street-level dealers. These were beings who controlled entire star systems, commanded fleets of warships, and had built empires on suffering and exploitation. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. Crime bosses who had ruled unchallenged for decades sat rigidly in their chairs, their usual confidence replaced by something they hadn't felt in years, genuine fear. Word had already begun to spread through the underground networks about strange disappearances and failed operations, but no one had understood the full scope of what was happening until now. Korax's four eyes surveyed the assembled criminals, with a mixture of satisfaction and nervous energy. As guildmaster, he had always maintained a careful balance between the various criminal factions, providing assassination services to whoever could pay while avoiding taking sides in their endless wars. Today, that neutrality was coming to an end. Fellow leaders of the galactic underworld, Korax began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived in the deadliest profession imaginable. I have called this emergency meeting to announce a fundamental change in how the Assassin's Guild operates. Murmurs rippled through the room as crime lords exchanged worried glances. Some leaned forward in their seats, while others sat back as if trying to distance themselves from whatever announcement was coming. Effective immediately, Korax continued, the Assassin's Guild formally announces that all contracts targeting humans are permanently blacklisted. No member of our organization will accept, pursue, or attempt to complete any assassination mission involving human targets. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Overlord Grimjo of the Slave Trade Consortium, a massive being whose species had evolved from predatory pack hunters, slammed his enormous fist on the table with enough force to crack the obsidian surface. His scarred face contorted with rage as he rose to his full, intimidating height. You cannot be serious, Grimjo roared, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. We have existing contracts worth billions of credits. We have binding agreements that go back decades. You cannot simply void them because you've developed some ridiculous fear of soft little humans. Other crime bosses began voicing their own protests. The Drug Cartel Federation's representative, a serpentine being known as Venomai, hissed her displeasure. This is madness, Korax. Humans are nothing but weak diplomats and traitors. They pose no threat to our operations. But Korax held up one clawed hand for silence, and something in his expression made even the most powerful criminals in the galaxy pause their complaints. There was a look in his eyes that none of them had seen before, something that resembled the respect a predator shows for an even deadlier hunter. Furthermore, Korax announced, his voice cutting through the nervous murmurs, the Assassin's Guild is entering into a strategic partnership with human intelligence services. Our resources, our expertise, and our network will now be working directly with human operatives. The silence that followed was deafening. For several long moments, no one moved or spoke as the full implications of Korax's words sank in. These crime lords had built their power on the assumption that they could eliminate any threat through violence, that there was always someone willing to kill for the right price. Those agreements you mentioned are now void, came a calm, measured voice from the shadows near the chamber's entrance. Every head turned as Ambassador James Mitchell stepped into the light, his appearance completely at odds with the deadly atmosphere of the room. He wore a simple diplomatic uniform and carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone attending a routine business meeting. But he wasn't alone. 6 figures in dark clothing flanked the ambassador, their faces hidden behind advanced tactical masks. They moved with the fluid precision of apex predators, each step calculated and purposeful. These weren't ordinary security personnel or diplomatic guards. They were something far more dangerous. Krovik stepped forward from among the shadowy figures, removing his mask to reveal a face that several crime bosses recognized. The young assassin who had once been eager to work for anyone willing to pay now bore the insignia of human intelligence services on his uniform. His expression was cold and professional as he surveyed his former potential employers. The hunt begins now, Krovik said, his voice carrying none of the uncertainty that had marked his failed assassination attempt months earlier. We know where you operate, who you work with, and how you move your operations. We suggest you start running. The effect on the assembled crime lords was immediate and dramatic. Beings who had commanded respect through fear and violence suddenly found themselves on the receiving end of a threat they couldn't simply eliminate. Some tried to maintain their composure, but others began backing toward the exits with barely concealed panic. Overlord Grimjo made one final attempt at intimidation. drawing himself up to his full height and baring his razor-sharp teeth. "You think we're afraid of a few humans and some traitor assassins. We have armies. We have fleets." Mitchell's smile was patient and understanding, like a teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student. "Your armies and fleets are very impressive," he agreed. "But they're designed to fight other armies and fleets. They're not designed to protect you from hunters who know every hiding place you've ever used, every contact you've ever made, and every weakness you've tried to keep secret." As if to emphasize his point, one of the masked figures whispered something in Grimjaw's native language, something that made the massive crime lord's face go pale with shock. The words were too quiet for others to hear, but they clearly contained information that Grimjaw had thought was absolutely secret. Within minutes, the conference chamber was nearly empty as crime bosses fled in various directions, abandoning their usual arrogance in favor of desperate escape plans. As the last of them disappeared through the exits, Mitchell turned to Korax with genuine appreciation. "Thank you for understanding the new reality, Guildmaster," Mitchell said warmly. "The galaxy has more than enough real monsters to keep your people busy for centuries to come. Slavers, war criminals, tyrants who oppress entire worlds, these are targets worthy of your skills." Word of the meeting spread through the criminal underworld faster than a hyperspace transmission. The message was clear and terrifying. Humans didn't just survive assassination attempts. They turned the galaxy's own hunters against its true predators. The age of easy targets was over, and the real monsters would finally face the justice they had avoided for so long.